Want to welcome everybody to this webinar, which we're calling Fiber 101. I want to thank Holly McPherson for contacting me to get this set up. My name is Curtis Dean, and I represent the Community Broadband Action Network. I'll talk a little bit about CBAN here in just a minute. I'm also a consultant and work with communities that are exploring ways to get better broadband into their community. So in talking with Holly and knowing there were questions among the folks in the ECIA group about fiber, what it is, what it isn't, why it's needed, etc., we kind of came up with two ideas for two separate webinars, which Holly should have emailed you all the information about. The one you're on now, which is really just kind of a basic level. What are we talking about here? What is fiber optics and fiber to the home? And then we will be doing another webinar where we dig a little more detail into what communities can do to promote fiber development in their communities, whether that be a town or a rural area. So this is the first part of that, like I said, kind of Fiber 101. And as I mentioned, I'm with Community Broadband Action Network. And Community Broadband Action Network, also known as CBAN, is an organization that I co-founded with a couple of friends and associates about 3 years ago, with the goal of helping communities get better access to more information and networking about broadband solutions. So the goals and our mission of CBAN is education, which would be things like we're doing here today. We hold monthly webinars and sometimes more frequently on topics that are of interest to community leaders on broadband. So for example, this session, although we're doing it specifically for your group, this is a session that is similar to others that we've done with other CBAN members across the state and other states. Connection is an important part of our mission. We want to create a networking between communities and community leaders so that you don't operate in a vacuum when it comes to dealing with these issues. You can talk to other communities that have similar issues, other communities that have built their own networks or partnered with private companies to build networks, or even those that are just advocates for better broadband. Guidance and advocacy are a big part of what we try to do through sessions like this and through one-on-one discussions. We try to help communities steer down the path toward potentially solutions that bring better broadband to their areas. And for those that already have adequate broadband, try to provide them with some guidance and assistance on making sure that their community is benefiting from that better broadband. So that's what CBAN does. I'll talk a little bit in just a minute about what CBAN's, how you can become involved in CBAN. I'll give you a free preview that membership in the Community Broadband Action Network is free. And that's pretty cool because free is better than paid. We have community members, we have advocate members, we have provider members, and then we have vendor members who are solution providers and companies that sell products and services in the broadband space. And they're the one who's paid dues that help us do the things that we do. So I'll give you a little bit more detail on community membership at the end here. It would be sure great to have any of you in the ECIA group join as community members of the CBAN. So diving into my presentation a little bit more here, I just want to remind everybody that a couple of ways to communicate with me. We have a Q&A at the top of the page. If you have a question for me, you can hit that and type your question in. I will be monitoring those throughout the webinar. So if you do have something there that you want to ask a question of, you can do that. You can also, if you afterwards have questions, you can send those questions to Holly, and she can get those to me. So if there's a couple of different ways for you to do follow-up into the discussion that we have today. I'm going to try to get you out of here about in 45 minutes or so, depending on how many questions and answers we have, maybe a little sooner, depending on the flow of information. Let's take a look at what we're talking about when it comes to internet access here in the year 2020. There's various platforms that can be used to deliver internet access. First of all, believe it or not, there are still people out there that have dial-up internet, the original way that people got online. It is limited to just a few areas and is limited to just a few use applications, but there are still people out there that have dial-up internet, maybe use it to check email once in a while, and that's just about it. Satellite service is another way to get internet access, and it is something that has been used and been fairly popular in very rural areas who have no other choices. Your cellular provider also can provide data to you, and while that those data plans are primarily really structured toward using on a mobile device, they can also be used for data for your computer or whatever by using a hotspot. They have definite disadvantages, one of which is speed and the other of which is data caps. So you may not be able to consume as much data as you need or want if that's your primary source of internet access. But unfortunately, even though we're here in the 2020s now, that's about the best some people can do in rural areas. Fixed wireless is being used in a lot of rural areas to deliver internet service. The fixed wireless service essentially means there's an antenna on your house and it's pointed to an antenna on a tower or a grain elevator or a water tower somewhere. And those data signals go back and forth between your antenna and that antenna wirelessly. Fixed wireless is a good solution for some areas where a wired solution is not available, but it still has some limitations on it. DSL, which stands for Digital Subscriber Line, that's the way phone companies have been providing internet service traditionally in the past, using copper wires. A cable modem is a service that is traditionally provided by a cable TV company using copper wires, different kind of copper wire, a coaxial cable, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit about the limitations and the advantages of that. And finally, you can get internet access through fiber all the way to your home or business. And this is a growing, more common place where people get internet via fiber. It is growing across the country, but it's still not growing as much in some small towns and rural communities as we would like to see. So that is kind of what we're going to talk about here. These are the different ways you can get internet access. When it comes to getting broadband internet, well, there's a definition for that, and it was set by the Federal Communication Commission a few years ago. The FCC said that in order for internet to be called broadband, it had to deliver 25 megabit per second speeds download, and it had to be able to do at least 3 megabit per second upload. Download, of course, means data coming from the internet into your computer. Upload means going out from your computer to the public internet. So that's what the FCC defined as broadband, and it's been a few years now since they set that definition. They did take a look at changing that definition earlier this year, but decided to keep it where it is at 25 by 3. Well, when it comes to technologies that can deliver what we consider broadband, that rules a few of these out. First example, dial-up is immediately left at the side of the road because the speeds are just much, much smaller than that 25 by 3. Satellite in today's world has its limitations because of the satellite services that are being used are based on satellites that are in a geosynchronous orbit. That's 25,000 miles out and back when that data goes from your house to that satellite. And that creates some issues with latency or delay time in the round trip of that data. And it also, the data is quite expensive and there's low caps for that. So it's not really a broadband solution. Now, the next generation of satellite broadband will be much better and much more reliable and much more usable. SpaceX, for example, has launched, I think, over 700 satellites now on their way toward many, many more. And that satellite service will be capable of delivering speeds much higher than the older satellite structures, and indeed well into the broadband area. They're talking up to 100 megabits per second in some of the tests that are being run today. So fixed wireless is certainly a way that, well, I skipped over cellular, but I talked a little bit about that earlier. Cellular service is problematic in that the data caps are too low to really serve as a full-time internet connection for a home or business. And number two is that the speeds are going to vary by your terrain and may or may not be able to deliver a 25/3 service. In some cases, through LTE, you can get it. In other cases, it's not available. So it's just not a reliable first choice for broadband service. DSL, in many cases, can be broadband because there are DSL lines out there that are over 25 megabit per second download. Unfortunately, there's a lot of DSL out there that's only 1.5 megabits per second or 10 megabits per second, and those aren't considered broadband. And a lot of the larger phone companies that operate those old legacy telephone networks just are not in a financial position to do serious upgrades that would be needed to either create faster DSL speeds or ultimately to go to fiber. So DSL is a iffy solution for most people. Cable modems are operated by cable companies over their cable TV plant, and they are certainly capable of broadband speeds, and in fact advertised speeds of up to 1 gigabit, which is 1,000 megabits per second, are available, especially in the communities that are served by Mediacom. The challenge with cable modem internet is it is of variable quality and reliability, and if the facilities that cable operator is using are older or maybe haven't been as well maintained, then those services can be lacking in terms of reliability. Also, with cable modems, it is a shared bandwidth between the home you're in or the business you're in and everybody else that is off of the same fiber node or fiber interconnection. So that means there can be significant slowdowns at a time when a lot of people are using data. Of course, we've all experienced a lot of data usage this year because of COVID, and that has been a common complaint about people that are served with cable modem service, is that it's slow a lot. And it used to be just slowed when the kids came home and started viewing content at night, but it's been slow all since March because everybody's using data all the time to work, to go to school, etc. And then finally, fiber, which is like I mentioned, growing rapidly in coverage areas across the United States, and even here in Eastern Iowa, where you guys are based, there's a lot of fiber going in the ground and a lot of fiber that has been in the ground. And that's what we're going to talk about mostly in this presentation, about what is fiber and why is it better than the other options. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen. Again, I'll remind you, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A functionality on the screen. Also on chat. Yep, Holly, I will take care of that for you. Sorry, I just looked at the chat, and Holly wants the list of everybody that was here, which is absolutely great. I'm going to share a little video with you, assuming I can get this right, that I think does a really good job of really describing what fiber to the home is all about. And hopefully I can maximize the screen, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this as well as see it. So here we go.
Well, fiber to the home is a method of transporting signals from the point of origin, which might be called a head end or a hub, out to a subscriber. And it is a solution that doesn't require any active devices, so it allows us to deliver this content at a much reduced operating expense and for greater distances and higher volume of content as well.
The biggest driver is certainly speed and the capacity of a fiber plant. HFC certainly has limited capacity, although that capacity has been expanding with new technologies recently. But the big thing about fiber to the home to me is that it's, I don't want to say future-proof, because nothing is really future-proof, but better future-prepared. We know that we're able to do 10 gig now on fiber to the home. We're seeing architectures of 40 and 100 gig come out. Upstream is looking like it's headed towards 10 gig as well. So I think from a capacity standpoint, it has really significant legs.
So the drivers for fiber to the home are primarily bandwidth and operating expenses. So if you look at the way fiber can be transported over very large distances, it does not require any amplification generally to get to the service area. And that means the reduction of a lot of active devices that require maintenance and that also consume a lot of power. So from an operating environment, it's much less costly to operate, and it delivers much higher bandwidth than you have with the traditional alternatives.
I think one of the biggest drivers for fiber to the home is probably network reliability. With HFC plant, there's a lot more potential points of failure. There's a lot of pin connectors out there, both on the transport and feeder cables. Whereas with the PON network or fiber to the home network, a lot of that doesn't exist. It's almost a purely passive network, way fewer points of potential failure, less power supplies are needed, if any, and yeah, just network reliability.
So think of fiber to the home as this roaring river, huge river of bandwidth. And it's leaving the cable operator all the way through the access network, and then the river branches off into smaller rivers. So we take this huge optical signal, this big river, we hit a splitter, and we break off into little tiny rivers. Still rivers, not streams, because it has tons of bandwidth potential. And each one of those rivers will connect to little tiny huts, if you will, or houses. And those rivers will feed the water, in our case, bandwidth, to all these subscribers. Now think of the packets as boats that can go on this roaring river to the subscriber. There's different types of boats. So if you want to use Ethernet, you can get an Ethernet boat. And then you can use that to travel over the river, go down, be split off, and those Ethernet packets can arrive at different subscribers' locations. If you prefer, you want to use asynchronous transfer mode or ATM, that's an option. Maybe a GPON solution, a gigabit passive optical network. That's another way of doing fiber to the home. T1, E1, Sonnet. You can have different types of boats. So what we're saying here is you have more opportunity for different packets, and these different packets can carry the data. And then the same in the upstream. The subscriber can use their smaller river and travel back up the river, and all those boats will then connect to the large raging river that will feed back into the cable operator. Now the nice thing about this river is we can change the endpoints of the river. So for instance, all of a sudden 40 gigabit per second Ethernet comes down the road. We're able to actually change the technology in the head end and hub site, and also update the technology at the subscriber site, and we could turn that river into 4 times the raging river it is today. So say if it's a 10 gig today, we can make it a 40 gig tomorrow, and maybe even make it 100 gig the next day.
Well, it seems to be an accepted standard now that if you're going to do a greenfield build, which is to put out a service to new homes or areas that haven't been served before, fiber to the home is the de facto choice for that kind of solution because of the reduced operating expenses I mentioned and the high bandwidth that it has. DOCSIS 3.1, because it relies on existing infrastructure, seems to be the default for brownfield deployments. And that's probably a fairly conservative way to look at it. I think if our customers will take a look at total cost of ownership over, say, a 5 to 10 year period, weighing in the OpEx benefits of fiber to the home, and then being realistic about how bandwidth is consumed, and there will be a need to change out the endpoint electronics in that course of time, I think you'll find that fiber to the home might also be a worthwhile consideration for brownfield as well.
From a standpoint of the personnel at a cable company, the field technicians will be the most impacted. Splicing fiber is just a completely different animal from dealing with hardline coax or anything like that. Problems are going to be very different. You won't be chasing ingress the way you do now, but you might be looking for a speck of dust on a terminal somewhere. Honestly, a speck of dust in a coax connector right now is not a problem, you know? So I think the field technicians are, you know, a major factor, but it's going to have to go all the way from top to bottom in a cable company. The phone reps in various call centers will have to be up to date on how to do diagnostics on the ONT, diagnostics on the network, looking at, you know, capacity on the network, things like that. So really everyone in the company is going to have to become familiar with it from one side or another.
All right, that probably got into a little more of the operational weeds toward the end than you needed to see, but I think it did a good job kind of illustrating the difference between a fiber network and, say, a coaxial network like the cable TV companies are offering. So back to our little slideshow here, I want to talk a little bit about those differences a bit more. I figure out which screen to share with. There we go. All right. That was the video. Okay, so this, I just did a little graphical representation of the differences between in bandwidth that you see with these different types of technologies. Now, keep in mind that I think I'm sharing the wrong screen here. Let me try that again. There we go. So keep in mind here that I'm using kind of a pipe analogy or allegory to compare these. So the width of the pipe is variable by the amount of data you can push through it. So for example, over here on the far left, you see 10 megabits per second. If we represented that as the size of a pipe, it would look like that. It doesn't, 25 megabits per second, it doesn't look like it's 2.5 times bigger, but you got to remember, it's not the width of the pipe, it's the total volume of that pipe. And so a 25 megabit per second pipe looks like that. So 25 megabits per second, that is your FCC definition of broadband. So if you've got that pipe or above, you're considered to have broadband, even if it's not necessarily enough to satisfy your needs. 100 megabits per second is becoming really kind of the de facto standard now for cable companies and for fiber companies. In fact, we'll talk more about this at the next webinar, but the municipal fiber utilities that have launched here the past few years are all using 100 megabits per second as their bottom line speed. So that would be the entry level for internet in those communities. 100 megabits per second is a lot of data, but when we start talking about things like 4K video and eventually 8K video, when we start talking about lots of people working from home or educating themselves from home, it can get hogged up pretty quickly. So 100 megabits per second gives most families the amount of bandwidth they need in today's world. A gigabit per second is what is traditionally been employed by fiber to the home networks. It is also what Mediacom and a couple other cable companies out there can advertise or do advertise as being available on their cable plans. The challenge with the cable delivered gigabit, such as Mediacom advertises, is while they're physically capable of doing 1 gigabit per second download speeds with network conditions, if they are optimal and if the plant works all right and everything, but it's upload speeds that are the big challenge. So while you might get 1,000 megabits down, the best they might be able to do is 50 megabits per second up. Again, for the average consumer, that may not be a big impact, but that might be a huge impact on a small business or a person working from home who is streaming a lot of content, as we all have been doing during COVID, that is pushing a lot of data out, and that upstream capacity may be a big squeeze point for them. With fiber networks, they're capable of doing a gigabit in both directions. So you'd be talking about 1,000 megabits per second download and 1,000 megabits per second upload. So there's just a lot more there. Now, 1 gigabit per second is what most of the fiber networks that are deployed, say in the state of Iowa, are doing right now. But the next standard for fiber to the home is to do 10 gigabits per second, so 10 times the bandwidth to a home or business. Cedar Falls Utilities was the first in Iowa to roll out 10 gigabits per second, available to any user in their Cedar Falls utility service territory. And they're offering 10 gigabit per second at about $110 a month. Their gigabit service is now kind of their base level service, and it's $70 a month. So extremely competitive prices there. If you were to build a fiber network in today's world, you could easily choose to deploy 10 gigabit per second services right out of the box, because the equipment is already out there, it's in the field, and it's being worked on, or it's being deployed by multiple different equipment providers. So it's no longer a big reach. Now, the cable companies are trying to get to have the ability to have 10 gigabits per second download themselves through some various new technologies that they are looking to deploy. In fact, Mediacom did a field demonstration of their, what they're calling 10G technology last week in Ames. The technology is not fully ready yet for markets. And even what Mediacom showed off in more of a laboratory setting last week really was only capable of 5 gigabits per second download. But they're hoping to be able to get to 10 gigabits per second download and something like 1 or 2 gigabits per second in the upload speeds. sometime in the next few years as they develop that technology. So the cable companies are trying to do everything they can to keep up with this demand, and it's just a matter of the physical infrastructure of copper wire and how much capacity can they squeeze out of that. So here's our big 10 gigabit green pipe over here, and you can see that compared to the size of the other ones. This is what 100 gigabits per second looks like. And this is nowhere on the cable or DSL timeline. No one I've talked to at least believes that could ever get to here. With a fiber network, you could deploy 100 gigabit service to any user that wanted it. It may not be a service that you put advertising out for. It's definitely not a service that every user needs, but there will be some businesses that need this service. And to get it today from one of the other providers is going to be a pretty big upgrade for them. And the only way they can get that to you is with fiber. So if you've got a business out there needing this kind of bandwidth, fiber is really the only way they're going to be able to get it anytime in the foreseeable future. So I want to talk a little bit about your situation there in East Central Iowa, the service territory that ECIA covers. You actually guys are in kind of a pretty good spot because you've had a lot of fiber deployed in that area over the past 10, 15 years, and some of that being deployed even as we speak. Many of the rural areas and small towns that are served by independent telephone companies are being served by fiber all the way to the home. Those rural cooperatives and mutual companies, and some of them are privately owned, have done a pretty good job of deploying the latest technology. Now, they have gotten significant federal subsidies to do that, but they've used those subsidies to actually reinvest in the infrastructure and in a way kind of future-proof what they are able to do for you, the customer. So you've got a lot of areas that are covered by the by the independent telephone companies. You also have a significant investment in your region by the Maquoketa Valley Rural Electric Cooperative, which started, I think, 2 years ago, their fiber to the home build, which is going to take several years to complete, but they're using that not only to provide internet service, but they're using that as a way to improve the electric grid reliability for their electric customers. So that's a big, big project, and that's the first REC in Iowa that's really done anything with fiber. Finally, fiber to the home is also available in some of the larger cities. I know Dubuque is in ECIA. I'm not sure about Davenport and Bettendorf, but in those cases, they have private companies that are building fiber to the home, and those private companies are basically building and going into direct competition with the existing cable company and the existing telephone company. For example, Imon is building fiber to the home in parts of Dubuque. We have a company called Metronet out of Indiana that's building in Davenport and Bettendorf. And there are others out there that are scouting around looking for opportunities to build fiber to the home in new areas. Kind of the general way that the industry looks at it is, and I've been saying this for years, first with fiber wins. It's unlikely you're going to, except in some isolated cases, have more than one fiber network built in any given geographic area, just because the economics are difficult. These fiber networks are very expensive. But if you're the first one in and you're building a physical infrastructure that is fairly future-proof or at least future-ready, then you are much more likely to, over the long term, earn a significant market share and reap the rewards of being successful. So this is certainly the case in these, Dubuque, Davenport, Bettendorf. There's one fiber network that's going to be there, and it's the one that's building today. You'll probably not see a Mediacom or a CenturyLink build fiber in the same locations where these other companies are building fiber. So what that looks like on a map, let me show you. The state of Iowa has done a lot of work over the past few years in doing some broadband mapping. And that broadband mapping has been designed to show where services are available and where they're not available. Let me find my, I wonder if I closed it. I might have to call back up and map again. But essentially what the federal government, I should say the state government has done, is that they have contracted with an entity called Connected Nation. And Connected Nation has done a pretty good job of mapping where broadband is today and where broadband is going to be in the future, as far as what service providers have proposed to build networks in new areas. And they've updated that map just very recently, and that's what I'm going to show you now, because I think it will show you a pretty good graphical representation about what things look like in eastern Iowa. Get zoomed in here. All right, so let me share this one. I think after months of doing this, I would be much better at it than I am, but I'm still not real smooth. Okay. All right, right now you should be seeing a screen that shows a map of the eastern Iowa area. I'll zoom it out a little bit, and we can zoom in if we need to as we look at specific areas. But this Iowa broadband map, which is available online, allows you to kind of look at things from different areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and look at, show me all the fiber networks in eastern Iowa. And when I click that, it's going to populate with these shades. So the dark brown and the medium and light brown are all areas that are served by fiber to the home. If you see this kind of yellowish color here, that means there is no fiber service available to individual homes or businesses. Doesn't mean there isn't any fiber, because fiber networks are still used for backbone services by providers. Also, occasionally direct fiber is built to, say, bury to a cell phone tower, but that does not necessarily serve individual homes and businesses in that area. So I zoomed in just here on the Dubuque area to give you a better idea. Now, these are all areas that our fiber networks are available. These are self-reported. So in other words, the providers are required every quarter to file a report with the FCC saying where they have service and what kind of service they have. And that's what's being pulled into this map on a census block basis to show what's available. So for example, you'll see Asbury, you got some fiber to the home being built there. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the company that's doing it, but it's a privately owned company that, I think Comelec, thank you. Comelec is doing that, and they're building fiber to the home in Asbury and also some other areas. Other areas around Dubuque, it is Imon Communications that is building that fiber to the home. If we zoom out a little bit here, we're going to get down into some of these rural areas where it is Maquoketa Valley REC that is building fiber to the home. Not all of their areas are built out yet, because like I mentioned, that is a multi-year project. Some of the areas you see shaded are areas that are being built by private, or I should say independent telephone cooperatives. Little Lamont over here has fiber to the home from Lamont Telephone. Bernard has fiber to the home from Bernard Telephone. You got a municipal over here in Bellevue. The city of Bellevue has fiber to the home in the city of Bellevue, in their city limits, and just a little bit outside of the river there. So again, zooming back out, this map shows where there's fiber and where there's not. Now, it's pretty easy to start to spot the holes in this map. And the holes generally are those mid-sized communities where there is an incumbent provider that is a big cable company or a big phone company. And we're not talking little phone companies like, Bernard. We're talking CenturyLink, Windstream, Frontier as the legacy telephone company. We're also talking, most of the time, Mediacom as the cable company. For the most part, those companies that are operating those legacy copper networks are not building fiber to the home. The ones that are doing it are the smaller, independently owned or cooperative companies, RECs, and municipals. So if we look here a little closer at this map, we can see, for example, Clinton, obviously right in the heart of your area. As of today, although there is some interest and some exploration of it, there is no fiber to the home or business service in Clinton, Iowa. Zoom in a little bit on DeWitt, because they're a little bit of a different circumstance. Part of DeWitt has fiber to the home. It was built by Grand Mount Communications. Other parts of DeWitt do not have fiber to the home because Grand Mount was not getting enough response from people there when they built their project to make that investment. They may still finish filling in those little holes you see in the town of DeWitt, or they may not. Show you another example here, a little further off to the west, but I still think Cedar County is still in the ECIA, and that's Tipton. So Tipton's a case where they have a little fiber to the home. As you can see, this little sliver looks like a gerrymandered congressional district, quite frankly. This is an area that is served by fiber to the home by one of the independent telephone cooperatives in the region. They built fiber through this area in order to serve cell phone towers. And as long as they were there, they decided to serve some of the homes and businesses that they passed. But the vast majority of Tipton does not have fiber to the home. And in fact, Tipton right now has a request for information out where they are hoping to identify a private partner, private company that is willing to work with the city to build fiber to the home in the entire town. And that RFI, in fact, is going to be due here in a couple of weeks. And there are several companies that have expressed interest in doing that. What that partnership will look like, we're not sure. It may involve some city ownership. It may involve just a completely privately built and owned network. We'll have to see. But there's various ways to get there. We'll focus more on that in the next webinar about what you can do as a community to fill these gaps. But I just wanted to bring up some of these separate areas, as you can see in eastern Iowa, where you have the haves and have-nots. Overall, you guys are doing pretty good. The challenge you have is some of the rural areas are topography make it very difficult not only to build a fiber network, but even to build something like a fixed wireless network that will serve those people. And so they are stuck with substandard service, and that's probably what you're hearing from some of the people that you all serve, that it's hit and miss. And some areas have feast and some areas have famine. And so you're trying to solve for the famine, and that's one of the reasons why you're involved in this webinar, and that's one of the reasons why you guys have had discussions in the past about this. So that's the map, and again, I'll show you the link to that here so you can refer to it on your own later. I think I shared the wrong screen. Oh, there we go. All right. So there's the map. If anybody wants to write that URL down, I will also email this along with the slideshow and a link to the video when we're wrapping up here. So I'll give that to Holly so she can distribute as needed. But it's basically connectednation.org/Iowa, and you can select their mapping analysis. They just finished updating this Iowa broadband map about 3 weeks ago. So it is very fresh off the press. In fact, I haven't even had a chance to really dive into it much yet. The state of Iowa is using that map too, also to evaluate which areas might be eligible for funding for new projects, because the state and even the federal government are not funding projects to put fiber to the home in, for example, in an area that they already considered to have broadband. So if you're in a town and the cable operator offers 25 megabit per second, or the phone company offers that with a DSL product, you're not going to be able to get any money to make it better in your community. All these federal subsidies and state subsidies are first going in to filling in all the holes across the country, to fill in all those gaps for minimum broadband. And then hopefully maybe we can do better than that in the future. So where those investments are happening right now, they're happening with private money mostly, some public money, but they're not coming from state and federal levels. They're coming from local governments or shareholders of local telephone companies or REC ratepayers. So, but that's the URL if you want to write that down. And again, I will come back to that in just a little bit. I wanted to just bring up a little bit about the CBAN, that the hat I'm wearing for this webinar today. We are a membership organization, and community membership is absolutely free. It's open to cities, counties, utilities, cooperatives, basically any community-based entity that doesn't operate its own internet service. So if you're not in the business today, you're eligible to be a community member. You know, we really encourage communities or entities that are trying to advance broadband and solve for broadband problems to become a member of CBAN, because it will allow you access to our ecosystem of learning, our ecosystem of networking, et cetera. 2020 has been a complete bust for us because our events are where we like to have networking. We haven't been able to do them in person, so everything's been online, but we're hoping to return to our normal schedule, and we have at least 2 in-person events a year and monthly webinars that are all free and open to anybody who's a community member, which maybe I didn't mention this already, is free, of course. So you're welcome to join. Give you an idea of, this is the list of communities that are CBAN community members right now. We have a lot in Iowa. We've got a couple outside of the state of Iowa, including Fort Morgan, Colorado, which has done a really interesting job of partnering with a provider to build a fiber to the home network. The provider, the city owns the network, and the provider leases it from the city in order to be the provider. So these are the CBAN members that we have, and of course we would love to have you join if you are so interested. Here's how to do it. Excuse me. That's what happens when you talk for 45 minutes straight. This is the link to join CBAN, and again, counties can join, towns can join, heck, a township can join if you wanted to. Economic development associations can join. We've got several of those in Montgomery County and Madison County and some others. So we encourage you to take a look at that and possibly join CBAN and become part of our little network. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to ask if we have any questions. If you do, hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen or the chat button. Either one, I will be able to read it and answer any questions that you have. While we're doing that, I'll just mention that we are going to do another webinar here. I should have written it down so I wouldn't have to go look it up, but I didn't. But Holly sent that information out to you. Now, the next webinar, we're really going to focus on action. And by action, I mean moving forward to solve for any issues you might have in broadband in your community or in the rural areas that you are part of. Those solutions are going to include public solutions, private solutions, collaborative solutions, working with existing providers, or perhaps even recruiting new providers in. That's what we're going to really talk about at the next session, including taking a look at what some of the cities in Iowa have done, some 28 now, that have built their own broadband networks. So, yep, there was another cough. I am not seeing any questions here. So I will go ahead and close the webinar. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, if you do have questions after the fact, feel free to relay those through Holly, and she'll get those to me. We hope to see you all on the next webinar, and I will be emailing out this information to Holly so she can share back with everybody. Again, thanks for coming on, and we'll see you at the next webinar, and everybody have a fantastic day.